Build your business with intent with special guest Kevin Palmieri on today's episode of the Serve No Master podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Thrivecart. Need a shopping cart but don't want to pay monthly fees? Thrivecart is the perfect place to start your journey. When they first started, I didn't think they'd go the distance. Now I have an account. Yes, I've got egg on my face. See how easy Thrivecart makes it to sell digital products? Servemaster.com/Thrivecart.
Are you tired of dealing with your boss? Do you feel underpaid and underappreciated? If you want to make it online, fire your boss and start living your retirement dreams now, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Serve No Master podcast, where you'll learn how to open new revenue streams and make money while you sleep. Presented live from a tropical island in the South Pacific by best-selling author Jonathan Green. Now, here's your host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of the Serve Master podcast. We have an amazing guest today, Kevin, who's going to talk to us a lot about kind of internal workings of becoming an entrepreneur, a subject that's really important to me because there's a lot of challenges we face that we think we're the only ones. I'm the only one who has imposter syndrome. I'm the only one who's dealing with confidence. I'm the only one who struggles with habits. And in fact, these are pretty universal problems. And often the first step is just finding out, oh, other people have the same issue as me. So I'm so excited. Thank you so much for being here today, Kevin.
Absolutely. I love it. I love the little pre-frame. I'm excited to chat and see where we go today, my friend.
So I'd love to learn a little bit about your backstory, about where your journey began and kind of that moment where you said, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to be in the pilot seat. What was that moment like for you?
Yeah, it was interesting because for most of my life, Jonathan, I jumped from job to job. I didn't go to college. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I ended up getting a job in the construction industry. And if you fast forward 3, 4, 5 years, I ended up making $100,000 doing this job as a foreman. And for a 26-year-old or 25-year-old kid with no college degree, all things considered, that's pretty successful. But I remember having that moment where I opened my final pay stub of the year. I saw 6 figures and nothing inside of me changed. And I realized I found success, but I didn't feel very successful. After that, things got really interesting because my job required me to be on the road. So I spent 10 months out of the year on the road, living in hotels, traveling every single week. I did it because of the money. And when I realized that the money isn't actually what I was after, I really started to loathe this job. And the year after I made the money, that big 6-figure paycheck, I actually started a podcast. I started a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast because for most of my life, I had lived unconsciously. The opposite of unconscious was hyperconscious, and that's how I wanted to live. So I started this podcast. I was being pulled between the podcast and my work, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and I was miserable, and I was out of alignment, and I couldn't hold down a relationship because I was never home, and my mental health was suffering. My physical health was suffering. And what really happened for me, Jonathan, is I woke up on a cold winter morning in a hotel room 6 hours from where I lived. My alarm clock went off at 5:15. I sat up. I slid to the edge of the bed. I was lacing up my work boots. And the best way to explain it is there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time, and every single one was on a different station. One was saying, you're stuck at this job forever. You're never going to make $100,000 anywhere else. If you do leave, what will your friends think? If you do leave, what will your family think? And do you really think you can do this podcast thing? It's probably not going to happen. And in that moment, I felt like if I was to take my life, I would take my problems with me. I'm blessed because I have a very good, great, I won't even say good, a great group of humans around me. I sent a message to my friend and now business partner, and he said, I think you need to change your environment. So that was really the moment for me, Jonathan, where I realized I found success. I didn't feel very successful, and I needed to make some sort of shift. So I left my job and went full time into what we're doing today. And that's when I became an entrepreneur.
So you brought up a whole bunch of stuff I want to ask about, but then you brought up something very serious at the end, which I can't skip over. And there is this thing where, especially as men, I know some women feel it too, that we're like driven to push a career so far. Like I remember when my dad had his first heart attack at his desk, right? And it's like to do the career that oftentimes we sacrifice this other part. And I think it's part of American culture, right? That we have to sacrifice, we have to suffer to have the good thing. And we get to these really bad places of mental anguish, and it's very difficult to talk about. So I just want to say it's very brave of you to bring it up, because a lot of people won't. And I think it's a big issue. I also think it's a huge issue for entrepreneurs, which is that the first day you start working and you're by yourself. So you suddenly lose the human contact, and that can be really challenging. It's something I deal with a lot because I live remotely. I live on a small island in the middle of nowhere, which is awesome, except for nobody understands what I do for a job. And I can't talk to my wife and kids about it. My kid's 4 years old. He doesn't understand what daddy does. He goes, "Oh, daddy touches a computer and money comes out of it." I was like, boy, do I wish that was true. So that's a really good thing to bring up. I think it's important to realize that while there's the business side, there's a lot of mental challenges that go into starting this type of career and just to feeling the need to perform.
Mm. Yeah, I say this all the time. People say, "What have you learned the most about?" I've learned the most about myself. Yeah, I've learned about sales and marketing and the economy and speaking and podcasting. But the thing I've learned the most about is Kevin as a human being, Kevin's insecurities, Kevin's fears, Kevin's weaknesses, Kevin's strengths. So I think if you really want to be a successful, well-rounded entrepreneur, you have to learn more about yourself than anything else. And honestly, transparently, that can be a very difficult thing, because when you're looking in difficult mirrors you haven't looked in before, you're going to see stuff you might not necessarily like, and that can be painful.
Yeah, and it can be a surprise, right? We're taught these specific ways. And you talked about kind of going through life passively. And what I noticed when I was 18 is my friends fell into two categories. You're going to college, college isn't on the table. And what was very interesting to me, one of my friends right out of high school working in a slaughterhouse, I was like, that is a tough job. To me, that's one of the toughest jobs. He's like, yeah, I kill a couple thousand pigs a day. I was like, whoa, that's a really tough job, long hours, but it's the union card, the whole thing working in. And he immediately had to switch from childhood to adulthood. There was no in between period, which college is a part of, but most people, it's not an active decision, right? They're either going to college or not going to college. Usually it's because their parents either tell them. They're either come from the not college parents, or they come from the college parents, or they're the group of people who they're going to be the first people to go to college and their parents are really pushing them. And we make that decision passively. So many people go to college or make this big first life decision, and they get into hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt often, and they're not even sure why they went. And that's why they end up with really weird majors that don't translate to an actual career. So I think that's really interesting to talk about how we go through life passively and we end up in a situation where, how did I get here? And we feel like we didn't make any decisions.
Yeah, to your point, I was very much in the second group where it didn't even seem like an option for me. Nobody in my family had gone to college. I didn't really have anybody to walk me through the steps. I didn't know how I was going to get financial aid. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So very much to your point. And I like to say this too, because we hear so many success stories of people that didn't go to college and then end up being successful, or people who went to college and end up being very successful. There were many times in my life, Jonathan, where I was like, oh my goodness, did I make a mistake by not going to college? Now, yes, it all worked out, but there was definitely some dark nights of the soul where I was thinking, I think I may have made a giant mistake. I'm blessed I didn't go at this point, but it didn't always seem that way.
I think that that's really powerful, because I think the most important part is that for it to be an active decision, where it's like you go, oh, this is something I want, this is something I don't want, or it comes part of like a practice decision. Because I feel like most people, college or not college, or their first job is not really their own decision. I know my first jobs, I was like, who will hire me? I remember when I went to college, I remember they make this promise. They go, hey, everyone who graduates from here gets a job. They skip over the part that's like, but it might be a crappy one. And I remember when I graduated, I was like, guys, I'm ready. You promised when I graduate, I'm going to get a sweet job. I went into the jobs office at the university and I was like, did all of you guys graduate from here? That's my first thought. I go, uh-oh, that's like a bad sign. I was like, are you all the ones who couldn't survive out in the world? And they go, here's a website. It's called monster.com. They got a bunch of job listings. Like, good luck, man. You're going to find a job out there. And I was like, wait, what? That was it. That was the entire, I was like, well, that was a great investment of hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And that's, now law schools are getting in trouble because it turns out they'll say that all the law school students got jobs, even if it's at Starbucks or something, they still count it because they're cooking the books. But that's the thing, is that there's so much, I guess it's like false information out there, or smoke and mirrors, that we have to dig through a little bit to make that active decision if it's the right decision for you. And same thing with choosing your career. Most people bounce into their career, just like you kind of did. Like it was the first opportunity that popped up. You know, my first job was at Toys R Us. Why did I work there? Well, I walked in, I turned in an application. Someone had just quit. Like that was it. They're like, oh, someone just quit. You're the perfect candidate. Like that was, what qualification do you have? You're in the building. And it becomes your first job. Like you're alive and put on this vest. Here you go. And I was like, well, how does this machine work? They're like, you'll figure it out. And it was Christmas. And that was like, I thought I'd work in a toy store would be magical. It's not. People at Christmas are not happy. They're very mad because they don't want to wait in line at Toys R Us. But we end up on these careers and we're like, how did I get here? I don't know, because it's so unplanned. So it's very interesting. I'd love to know more about this idea of conscious decision making and how someone can flip the switch, or how you went through that process of going, I want every decision to be intentional.
For me, it was very much asking myself questions under my decisions. So I think what a lot of us do is we make a decision based on purely emotion. And that's what I did for most of my life. Most of my life, it was, what emotion do I feel? That's the decision I'm going to make. What really started to help me is I started to ask myself why. And it was from a very insecure place when it started. It was one of the first questions I ever asked myself. Why am I so insecure when I go to the bar? That was one of the first questions I dug into. And this is what I got to. I'm 5'4" and I am not valuable in a bar setting. That's not where I do my quote unquote best work, right? I'm a person who requires one-on-one conversation because I like having deep conversations with deep humans. That little breakthrough alone made me realize, okay, well, I've avoided the bar for most of my life. If I ever go, I have to be very, very drunk. What else does that mean? Where else is that insecurity hurting me in my life? Is it hurting me in relationships? Is it hurting me in friendships? Is it hurting me in the jobs I'm applying for? So yeah, that one question of why is this actually happening? That was the way that it started for me. And that's kind of how I live my life now. Why am I making this decision? Is it based on right now? Is it based on the future? Is it based on the past? I think you can really only understand your decisions at the levels you understand yourself. And so many of us are looking at ourselves today and who we want to be in the future, but we don't realize that the person we are today is because of the person we used to be and what happened to us in the past. So I think that's where you got to go first.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And we talked a little bit about in the pre-interview about limiting beliefs, which is where we say, oh, I'm not this, or I'm not that. Like I could never start my own business. I'm not smart enough. I'll never be the attractive guy. Whatever it is, we have this set of rules that sometimes they come from other people, like people picking on us in high school, our parents saying, oh, we're not the kind of family where kids go to college, or the kind of family where everyone goes to college. It's not a choice, right? You have that. And so sometimes it's put upon us. And another example of this is like all rich people are evil, or money is the root of all evil. And you have this thought and it goes, well, if I become successful, then I'm evil. And I've seen people who say things like that. And so they actively reject success because they don't want to turn evil. Now, that becomes so powerful. So how can we start to identify the beliefs we have that are holding us back? Like, for example, I had a strong limiting belief. My dad, superstar, almost, he was so successful in life in all these categories, always lived in the shadow. He was almost went professional baseball, almost became a lawyer for rock star bands, was like a rock star lawyer for his whole life, all these really great successes. And really amazing with women, all that stuff before he met my mom. And I was like, I thought, here's my belief, it skips a generation. I was like, maybe my kids will be cool, but I'll never be cool. And as long as I held that belief, that it always held me back. I was like, I believe that I would never have healthy and happy relationships. Now, of course, I'm married to someone who's way too good looking for me, have 4 kids, my dream life. I never thought my life would be this good. I talked to my landlord recently. He goes, what do you think of the house? I said, I never thought I'd live in a house this nice. Like straight up, I'm living beyond what I think I deserve. Like all the amazing things happen to me, but it starts with breaking through that barrier going, wait a minute. Just because someone's always told you this. I had that moment where I realized, I read this book and it goes, it's possible to get better at things. It's possible to get better at making friends. For me, that was a revelation. I had no friends till I was 17. And I said, wait a minute, what if you can get good at this? And I studied someone who was really nice. I said, this guy's so popular and nice. And my personality is a photocopy of his. I just studied everything he did. I was like, wow, this is the kind of person I want to be. And I became popular. I was like, wait a minute. And I think that's a really important lesson, is that just finding out that it's possible to make things better. Because so many of us, we think we can't improve our lives. We can't change our lives, whether it's an internal or external. whether it's I can't lose the weight, I can't go to the gym, I can't start my own business. So how do you kind of approach this of the metaphor of the limiting belief? Is it breaking through? Is it conquering? Is it understanding? Everyone uses these different ways of talking about it. Like, what's your thought on this?
To your point, I love the fact that you said when you learned it was an option, it became an option for you. I think that's the first step. There's a book by Carol Dweck called Mindset, and it's all about having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is you thinking that everything is the way it is and cannot be any different. A growth mindset is you understanding that everything is shapeable and human beings are unreasonably malleable, especially our brains. You can do so much with who you are as a human being. So I think it's the first step is actually understanding why you're thinking the way you're thinking. And I do believe it comes from a place of reflecting. Jonathan, you just gave the exact reason on why you felt the way you did, because you were comparing yourself to your dad and you assumed your belief was it has to skip a generation. So that all came from something in your past. Something happened to you sometime in your past where that got downloaded into you and you said, well, this is the way it is now. One thing I would say is for most people, I think it requires a level of action. And this is why. The only real way to get rid of your limiting beliefs is to prove them wrong. And I think it's through small actions. I had somebody came to me and they said, I want to be a speaker and I want to be a podcaster. And I said, awesome. We have to get you taking action on that. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how outside of your comfort zone is it for you to do a speech on Facebook right now? And she said, 12 out of 10, I can't do it. Cool. On a scale of 1 to 10, how outside of your comfort zone is it for you to record a video on your cell phone and show nobody? And she said, that's like a 0. Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, how outside of your comfort zone is sending me a video and nobody else and I won't show anybody else? And she said, it's probably like a 5. And I said, cool. That's where we start. And she sent me a video. It was 7 minutes long. She crushed it. And now she feels more confident. And that's less of a limiting belief. I believe action builds confidence and it also builds humility. So you have to figure what is the smallest available action that I can take that will help me knock down this limiting belief. I think it's good to understand. It's good to try to adjust your identity, but I don't know if you can really adjust your identity without new actions. So I would choose something small that might seem insignificant, but you never know how big of an impact that can have in the long run.
That's very interesting to me because one of the lessons I learned early on when I was trying to improve in different areas is there's 2 ways. You can say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to try a bunch of things. And you can say, I failed, right? I didn't get the goal. And I always think of the guy who walks up to a girl in the bar, asks for a number. She says no, goes back, head down, everyone laughing at him. And what you're training yourself, and this is the same thing. You apply for a job, you don't get the job, walk out, head down. And you train yourself to attach a negative emotion to trying. And so then you stop trying. So one of my most transformational moments, the reason I met my wife is because of this. Went to a bar one night and I said, I'm going to talk to people. And I was surrounded by other people in college, all these beautiful, beautiful women. I didn't talk to anyone. I started crying in public. Okay. Not cool. Turns out when you're crying in a bar, no one wants to talk to you. I went home and I was like, that was the best night of my life because I did something. I tried something hard. And from that night forward, my life, every night it got a little bit better, made more friends, learned how to talk to men and women, learned how to make these amazing friendships, started meeting celebrities, all these amazing things happened. But it started with switching from I failed to I tried. And if we can attach a positive emotion to effort, and it starts with small steps, that's why I think your lesson was really cool, is that you do something that's a little bit hard, but still doable. And then you go, I tried, that's good. It's not about I shot the video, but I didn't share it to anyone. You can always focus on well, I didn't get, the glass half empty. And that's really, I think that's where a lot of us get limited is we're trained to say, yeah, but I only got second place, right? Like, it's like, you beat 1,000 people, but one beat me. And we're always living that way. And I think that's one of the challenges is that there's always someone a little bit better. And so you can always push yourself down. So that's really cool.
I agree. I think that's a great point that I actually say that to people. I don't care about the outcome. I care about the effort. And that's what I'm trying to help them kind of adopt is if you go up to somebody and you get rejected, I don't care about the result. I want you to care more about the fact that you did something you never would have done. That's all that's happening. You're getting a result you've never gotten because you're trying an effort that you've never tried. And maybe it happens to be the negative result or the negative outcome. But yeah, I second that very much. I think you have to focus on the effort and the progress far less than the outcome, especially early on.
So the most common message I get for any type of person who's following me in my audience with a podcast, whether they want to be an author or build a business, any kind, is imposter syndrome. It's why would anyone listen to me because X? And the best example I have of this, I had a follower who goes, hey, I'm thinking about writing a book, but why would anyone be interested in me? He goes, I was a spy for the CIA for 30 years. Then I was undercover in the Russian embassy, and my wife was a ballerina who was undercover, and we went around Russia. And I was like, what do you think interesting means? It was literally the most interesting thing anyone's ever said to me. And there's this thing, the more someone is hesitant when they go, I don't think, when they say to me, I don't think anyone would be interested in, the more humility they have, the more crazy interesting their story is. Another person said, hey, I don't know if this is interesting, but I was driving a big rig truck and it flipped over and caught on fire and was heading towards the rail. And I thought I was going to go off a bridge. Is that interesting? And I was like, have you seen a Jason Bourne movie? It's fascinating to me that the more people think they're boring, the more crazy interesting their story is. So why is, and everyone has it. I think it's the most common disease. Everyone has imposter syndrome and everyone thinks they're the only one who has it. So how do people identify it and how can people start to?
Yeah, I think it's been vilified as something that's bad when in reality, I believe it's accurate to have imposter syndrome at the beginning of a journey, because I think that's you, as long as you're not over humility, like over humbling yourself, but you don't know what you're doing yet. And that's okay. I think that's an empowering place to be. And I think you have to make friends with the fact that I am a beginner here and I have emotions attached to being a beginner. When it comes to the story part, it's interesting because I wonder at times if that is just a limiting belief that has been put into place because that person doesn't want to be seen or found out. That's something I've seen often is people realize when they tell their story, they're going to have to tell more and more and more of their story. And if they haven't become aware, comfortable, and conscious of their past, I think that's very, very challenging. You never know what questions somebody's going to ask you based on your story. You never know what people are going to believe, what people aren't going to believe. So I believe it's probably judgment. People are probably afraid to be judged for their stories because at the end of the day, other than our names, our stories are one of the most personal things we have.
Very interesting. So I wrote my book, Serve Master, in 2016. It was the first book I'd written under my own name. I'd done a lot of ghostwritten books, projects for other people for about 6 years and done really well doing that. And when I was publishing that, that's the fear I have. There's this fear. This is the second really common question is, what happens if I get a negative review? And it's like, you're gonna. Like, I'll tell you that right out the gate. You're gonna, and it's gonna be mean. So, but they're like, if you look, Harry Potter has like 10,000 really mean reviews, like 1-star super review. And that's like the most popular book. Every book, every movie, there's someone who hates it. But there's this fear of judgment. And this is the phase we go through, right? Of like confidence building where you go, and for me, it was an age thing. I wish I learned this when I was in high school, but you learn that other people's opinions don't matter that much. As I get older, I care less and less if people don't like me. I'm at the phase now where I just assume everyone doesn't like me. And like, then anyone who likes me is like a pleasant surprise, but you're so worried. And I had this revelation, maybe when I was 27 or 20, I go, most people are extras in the movie and they don't get a speaking part unless I talk to them first. And when I had that revelation, I started to stop worrying so much. And because especially as you get to levels, like I don't think of myself as a celebrity, but every once in a while I meet someone who does, who's like, oh, I've read 10 of your books and I'm a really big follower. I'm like, oh, wow, I forget sometimes. And that's cool. That's very cool. It's like, makes me feel really good to know that someone's like really resonating with what I teach. But sometimes because of my wife, she's like, what are you talking about? Like, you know, she sees me as me, but sometimes we're so worried about that negative feedback because, and I'm not sure, but we all think it matters. Like, why does a stranger's opinion matter so much to us when the people around us, we mean so much to them?
I think it's our biggest fear realized. one of the best things that ever happened to me, Jonathan, I had been coaching for a while, and somebody reached out to me in my DMs, and it was like my biggest fear come true. He said, "Hey, I don't mean this with any negativity, but like, what actually qualifies you as being a coach?" And I was like, "Oh my goodness gracious, what is happening here?" And I thought about it. I sat there and I was like, "What actually qualifies me to be?" That's a great question. And I sent a very nice but thoughtful message back. And I said, "Honestly, that's a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. At this point, I've done 500 podcast interviews. I've interviewed some of the most successful humans on the planet. I've studied self-improvement every single day for the last 3 years. And I have done an immeasurable amount of work on myself. And that's what qualifies me to be a coach, is I'm helping people get to where I am." And the person responded and said, "Oh, cool. Like, good to know. I thank you for the thoughtful response." And I think what that did was it actually helped me prove to myself that I was capable and worthy of being a coach. So it's almost like, in a weird way, you don't build the skill set. Let's use this analogy. Your skin doesn't thicken unless you get some of that. And then as it thickens, it gets a little bit easier and a little bit easier. But I think we're all afraid of that. I think that's one of those things that's completely normal. One thing that's helped me, especially with negative reviews that are like anomalies, sometimes you can just tell people are having a bad day. So I try, and I'm not always this centered and able to do this, but I try to understand that oftentimes it's the way people are feeling about themselves more than it is me. And maybe I'm a mirror and I triggered something in them. That's helped me understand it. And then I think tapping into understanding, where do you get your self-worth from? If you require other people's okay and other people's positive judgment on you to get your self-worth, that's going to be a cycle that you're going to have to break as well.
Yeah, it's really challenging because I have some of these reviews that I keep that are like the really positive ones. Like someone emailed me once, "Jonathan, your book saved my marriage because I didn't understand my husband's business. I was going to leave him." And I was like, wow, that's amazing. It's like one of my favorite ones. And you don't get the good ones unless you get the bad ones, right? Like you have to put yourself out there. And there's this thing like that we don't realize what we're capable of until we go through it. So it's like there's people that have been punched in the face and people that haven't. And I had this roommate when I was in my 20s who's like, I never punched. He was so afraid of it. And I've been beat up by a Marine. Like that's a real beat up, like a proper, like I did not win that fight. I also didn't know I was in a fight until I was already flying down a flight of stairs. But it wasn't as bad as you think. Like it wasn't great, but until we experience something, it's always worse in our heads until we actually do it. And so that's why I think getting out there and trying things is so valuable. Like everyone who says that to me, then they get their first bad review. They go, "Oh, I thought it'd feel worse." I'm like, exactly. It's not as bad. It's just part of the game. It's part of being in the arena. Every movie has a hater. Every TV show has someone who hates it, starts to blog about how much they hate it. And there is this value to having these experiences that push us outside our comfort zone, and we realize, oh, I can do things I didn't think I was capable of. And I think that's where a lot of confidence comes from. A lot of it's experiential. It's like the first phase is like, I'm going to try things that are hard. Then you go, oh my gosh, I'm able to do this. I'm able to survive this situation, overcome this challenge, endure things. And we discover that we're capable of so much more than we originally thought. And oftentimes our experience is so unique that other people don't understand it. So I'm going through a phase right now. I was in a tragedy that nobody understands when I try and describe it because it's the only thing you see on TV. I was in a level 5 typhoon. My entire house was destroyed while I was in the house. The house flooded. Thought we were all going to die. Then my family all starved. Then we all got dysentery. Me and all 4 kids are in the emergency room. When we get to the hospital, it took 5 days to get enough money to get a boat to take us to the hospital. The doctor goes, "Oh, you would have been dead in about 12 hours and the rest of your kids in about 4 days." So my entire family was about, and nobody knows, and you can't talk about it because nobody knows. When I tell about the things we were ready to do to survive, people don't understand it. But what my family realized afterwards, I was like, we could do anything. If we can survive that, we're capable of anything. And everyone has something different. Everyone has the things they've overcome or the challenges they've faced that they think are their weakness. But it's like, no, the thing you did, the thing you overcame is what makes you strong. And that's where that's like a really challenging lesson. That's why when people come, they go, "I don't know if anyone wants to hear my story." It's like, no, your story, the bad thing you overcame is the most important thing. And that's not what defines you, but it's kind of what draws people in. It's why when you watch American Idol, it's 12 underdogs. Like, wow, all 12 of these people are like, all 12 of them are, there's no favorite in this competition because we all want the underdog to win. And they've really kind of figured that out. And I think that's so important because we're often afraid to tell a bad story or a challenge because we think it defines us or we think people will think less of us. And I found even when I tell people like stuff that's really specific, they like, oh, that doesn't seem real. I'm like, okay. And it kind of is empowering. I'm like, oh, I could say anything and they won't believe me because it's beyond their, and I kind of, this is like, took me 8 months to get to this point, like a lot of like really challenging moments. And same thing. I've always been like, I don't know about therapy, but when you have like super tier 1 PTSD, you got to do it. And that was another challenging because men don't talk about therapy. And so I went through a lot of this stuff and kind of, I think it's important that I talk about it. So my audience goes, oh, if Jonathan could do therapy, maybe I could do it too. Because sometimes you don't need it. And I was like, I don't know if this is a real disease. He was like, oh no, you've got like tier 1. He's like, you've got the super PTSD. He's like, it's called, natural disaster PTSD. It's a real thing. I was like, oh, I thought only soldiers get it. So it was like all of these things that like limit us and like, oh, I can't do that. I got to be the rock. I got to be the dad. But we go through these phases where we realize, oh my gosh, if I can survive that, like I thought I was going to die. So like, I'm not afraid of anything anymore. It's like, you just lose everything. You're like, I'm already in overtime. Like all of this is bonus time for me right now. And it becomes empowering as soon as you go, it's okay to talk about it. People will either engage with it or not. There's always going to be someone who doesn't like your story, no matter what you do. But when I think about is what if one person who's in a situation like you were, hears my story and goes, oh, you know what? I'm going to get help. Because I had a friend who didn't. I had a friend, this is a big moment in my life. We're at a party. Next day he was gone. And I wish he had told me because I would have done anything to have him still around. And I think that's kind of why it's important for people who are maybe a little bit famous like I am, like it's a little bit famous, but if one person, and that's why it's worth the sacrifice. Like if 100 people hate on me and stop listening, but one person like makes a good decision, then it's worth doing. And that's why I think exactly like I'm outside my comfort zone right now. I don't like talking about this, but I have to, because what if that one person is listening and this is the one episode they listen to?
Well, it's interesting too, because it's like the more you talk about it, the more comfortable you get. I've been telling my story for 5 years now. And at the beginning it was like, oh, are people going to judge me and they're going to think I'm weak? And now it's very much the opposite of, well, look, I mean, I've come so far and so much has been built based on that pain. And I'm so grateful I do talk about it because I know I've helped people. And then even to your point, Jonathan, I think getting just to the telling your story and maybe people not liking it, there's two options. Either you try to please everybody or you just be yourself and understand that some people will love you for it and some people will hate you for it. And that's really all you can do is be yourself. You don't want to have to play a part. You want to be yourself. One of my favorite quotes is, if you want to attract your people, you have to be yourself. And whatever that means to you, whatever that version of you is.
And what's really interesting is once you start telling your story, that's the thing that attracts the most people. They go, oh, when you told that part of your history, that's when I knew I wanted to connect with you. I'm like, what? The part I at least wanted to talk about? And it's very powerful. That's why when I work with a writing client, I say, first chapter, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you that you're willing to put in a book? Because that's when people like you. People want to see that you know how they feel. That's like the most important thing, because that's why we look for someone who's been where we've been or has the life we want or has been through a challenge we've been through, because they want to go, this person knows how I feel. And it's like Oprah did it kind of weird where she's like, we speak your name, but that's the idea, is that you want to be heard and you want to feel like this person, whoever you're looking up to or whoever following you're getting advice from, understands your experience and they know you, and that gives you like a feeling of significance. And I think that's what's really powerful. So that's a really, sharing your story, that's a tough thing to talk about. And it inspired me. I'm like, well, I got to talk about it too, because you gotta like, if people seek rapport, right? Where we want to be in alignment with someone, we go, oh, you've had a challenge, I've had the same challenge. And suddenly it's like amazing how the thing that is the last thing you want to talk about becomes the thing that really helps the most people. And that's why like, it's so interesting when people say, oh, I don't know if I should tell this story about what happened to me or my challenge that I overcame. Like, no, that's going to help people. Just the fact that you're talking about it, that's what people are going to email you about a lot. And it will become, it's not about you. Once you tell your story, it's about, oh, it allows them to tell theirs, even if they're only telling it back to you. Like a lot of people tell me stories that are very similar to mine, Why? Because they aren't ready to tell the whole world, and that's okay.
And it can become your mission too. I believe that your purpose comes from your deepest pain. One of our mentors, Evan Carmichael, said that the more you talk about it, the more you might realize, you know what? How many people are dealing with this? Wow, I didn't realize there was as many people dealing with this. And that might be a whole thing you can lean into. And then to your point about the storytelling, you hear people say this all the time. That really resonates with me. What does that mean? What does resonate mean? It means to be on the same wavelength, to be on the same frequency. That's what resonate means. And in order for that to happen, you have to tell your truth. And somebody will say, oh, I've experienced that too. Now we're on the same wavelength.
Yeah, I think it's often surprising to discover how many people have been through whatever you've been through, whatever you're going through, whatever your challenges. Like whether it's getting kicked out of college, your parents kicking you out of the house, or getting pregnant in high school. It happens to a lot of people. And that's kind of the cool thing about the internet and the great equalizer is that now you have access to such a large audience. You can find 1,000 people that have been through what you've been through and are passionate about what you're passionate about. And that's enough to build a business. So I just want to say thank you so much for being really open. This was a really cool episode. I never know what's going to happen. I thought we were going to talk about a whole bunch of different stuff, but this is a really cool episode. So where can people connect with you more, Kevin? Where can they learn about you, and where can they kind of see what you're doing and all the amazing things you're helping people with?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it was wonderful. I'm very grateful for the time. The best place for me is our podcast, Next Level University. We do 7 episodes a week, and we're always talking about self-improvement. So that is the best place to learn more because we're there every single day in your pocket. And then the best place on social media is Instagram. So my handle is @NeverQuitKid. If you have any questions, you want to send me a message, you want to share anything, I'm more than happy to be an ear to listen.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Guys, make sure to click, if you're watching the video, it's right below the video. If you're listening to audio, it's in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here, Kevin. That was amazing.
Thank you for listening to the Serve Master podcast. We give away amazing business bestsellers every single month. Head over to servemaster.com/free books to see what we're giving away this month.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Serve No Master podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode. We'll be back next week with more tips and tactics on how to escape the rat race. Please take a moment to leave a review at servenomaster.com/iTunes. It helps the show grow, and more listeners means more content for you. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.